Come with us as we take a look at Joan of Arc, the warrior saint, from Stephen Richey's eyes on this episode of Sunday Stroll Through History.
The following is a presentation from the Greece Historical Society.
Sunday Strolls Through History from the Greece Historical Society are sponsored by
members of the Greece Historical Society and by the sponsors of advertisements in the newsletter.
Joan of Arc, the warrior saint, presented by Stephen Richey. Recorded April 27, 2025 at the Greece Historical Society. The word of engagement in today's program is Joan of Arc. Put in the comments below an emoji representing Joan of Arc, or put your memories or views that you thought of Joan of Arc in the comments below.
Good afternoon on this beautiful sunny spring day. A small crowd today, but I want to introduce Stephen Richey. He was raised in the town of Greece, graduated from Olympia High School, so did I, in 1976.
Go Spartans.
And but then he went on and graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1984. He served out his military career in various places around the world, to include 4 tours in Iraq, and retired in 2010. He's the author of the scholarly book Joan of Arc, the Warrior Saint, and he has also appeared as an expert authority in the television documentary Saint Joan of Arc, Maid for God. So welcome, and if you want to put that on.
You want to set me up with this event?
Okay. Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here. Good to see you all, and thank you. As Bill was saying, my name is Steve Richey. I grew up here in Greece, New York. Graduated from Olympia High School in 1986. 76, I meant to say. 76. Trying to make myself a decade younger. It never works. Trying to youth myself by a decade. Nice try, Steve, but just in Florida. And then subsequently went to West Point, as you might have been able to get. I'm talking today about Joan of Arc, and I have reason to call myself an expert in Joan of Arc. First of all, because I wrote this book, Joan of Arc, the Warrior Saint, and it's available at Amazon.com. Now be careful when you go to Amazon.com, because there are 2 other books by the exact same title. And buy all 3 and compare if you like, but if you can only afford one, please buy mine. Okay. And I'm also in this video that I did for Eternal Word Television Network, Joan of Arc, Saint Joan of Arc, Maid for God. And I'm one of several people appearing as a, quote, expert, unquote, talking head on that video. So, my presentation today has 2 parts. First of all, a lecture, and I presume everybody's got their lecture notes, right? Okay, very good. You follow them with lecture notes. And then second, a picture slideshow. And we'll, if people need to take a break between the first half and the second half, we usually do that. Now, let's begin with the chronology. As you know, Joan of Arc, and you probably heard or the fact that she was a great military leader of France during the Middle Ages. And that's enough to know for the beginning. Now, her career took place during the 100 Years' War. Now, in 1337, the 100 Years' War begins when England invaded France. And there are books written about just the causes of the 100 Years' War. I'm not going to try to cover it all right now. Just suffice to say that the kings of England were not satisfied with being kings of just England. They wanted to be kings of France too. And so, in pursuant to that goal, they invaded France in 1337. Now, for the first 8 or so years of the war, it was all English. From 1337 to 1429, the English inflicted defeat after defeat on the French. Battles you may have heard of: Battle of Sluys, Battle of Crécy, Battle of Poitiers, Battle of Agincourt. Now, if you've ever read Henry V by William Shakespeare, the Battle of Agincourt, that's where Henry V made his St. Crispin's Day speech prior to the Battle of Agincourt. And according to Shakespeare. Now, in 1412, her name is Jeanne in French, and I'm going to try to refer to her by a proper French name, which is Jeanne, spelled as you see it there. Joan is the anglicization of her name. She's born in the village of Domremy, of which we'll see some slides in the slideshow, in the province of Lorraine in France. Now, her family is peasants. Now, we need to be careful about the word peasant here. They're not rich, but they're not grindingly poor either. Yes, they are peasants, but for peasant farmers, they were doing okay. By the standards of the day, they were doing okay. Now, in 1425, enemy soldiers attacked Jeanne's village. And it was the same year, when she's about 13 years old, that she starts having visions of saints who tell her to save France. Now, the villagers, when the enemy soldiers attack, they flee to a nearby town to escape. And when they return, they find that the town, Domremy, has been burnt to the ground. But Jeanne's house is the only house to survive because it's the only house in the village that's made out of stone. As again, you'll see in the slideshow when we get to that. But notwithstanding the fact that her house is the only one that survives, she still feels the sorrow of her friends and neighbors. And it's a matter of historical record that one of the remarkable traits of her personality was her sense of generosity, her sense of mercy, her sense of compassion to people around her. One of the reasons she became a saint eventually. And saints who she said appeared to her, she eventually identified as Saint Michael the Archangel, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. Now, the war has come to her doorstep, literally. Her village has been burnt to the ground. Her friends, neighbors are suffering as a result of the war. And as I say, it's now 1429, and the English have been winning ever since 1337. Now, it's at this time that these voices that Jeanne is claiming appear to her, that she claims to hear these visions of saints that appear to her according to her claims, persuade her that it is her God-appointed duty to rescue France from the English invaders, to place herself at the head of the French army and drive the English army from France. And in March 1429, Jeanne wins an audience with Charles, the uncrowned king of France. Now, this is kind of a knotty problem here. I have to go back and explain how this works. First of all, when you hear the word Dauphin, as you'll see in a minute here, and let me advance my slide. Oops, wrong way. Thank you. Okay, you'll see this word here, Dauphin. The Dauphin is a title given to the Crown Prince of France, the prince whose eldest, I should say, surviving son of the King of France, and who is therefore next in line to inherit the throne. And after approximately 80 years of warfare, all of this is France. This is all what we recognize today as France. But you see what the English in red, the English control about the northern 1/3 of France, to include Paris. They've got a part down here in the southwest around the city of Bordeaux, which is right there. And if that's not bad enough, a large faction of the French have gone over to the English side, they being the Burgundians. Now, the Burgundians, they're French, they speak French, they owe allegiance to the King of France, but in essence, they're traitors. And similar to the Vichy French in World War II, collaborating with the Nazis, the Burgundians were the collaborationist faction of the French who went over to the English side and supported the English claim to the throne of France. And the Burgundians are in green. So if you put together what's English in red and what's Burgundian in green, and compare that to what's loyal to the Dauphin still, you can see that the French have got a tough situation from them. They're losing, okay? And by the time Joan appears on the scene, Charles, the uncrowned king of France, is living in the castle in Chinon. I promise you, you'll see plenty of slides of Chinon. But here's the city of Chinon right here on the Loire River. And basically, he's got his bags packed for Spain. Things are going really badly, and he's thinking about giving up the fight. But Jeanne, encouraged, propelled forward, motivated by her voices from God through the saints, say that she is to journey from Domremy. Here's Domremy. You can see it's this little yellow speck right here. It's a loyal, it's a little isolated point of France that's loyal to the Dauphin. That's why if you can see it from where you're sitting, and if you'd like to move up closer so you can see it better, please do. But here's Domremy, a little patch of loyalist France that is loyal to the Dauphin, isolated, surrounded by Burgundian and English territory. Well, the voices tell her that she's going to travel from Vaucouleurs, which is the nearest town that has a loyal French commander to it. The voices tell her, go to Vaucouleurs, present yourself to the commander of the French force in Vaucouleurs, and persuade him to take you to Chinon to meet the Dauphin, where you're going to present yourself to the Dauphin, the uncrowned king of France, and tell him to give you command of the French army, and you, Jeanne, are going to lead his army to victory. And Jeanne, being a faithful religious girl, who you can argue whether or not she was schizophrenic or whatever. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. We don't need to get into today whether or not she's schizophrenic. I address it in my book. But for whatever reason, she is absolutely convinced and totally sincere that it is her God-given mission to save France. And she goes to Vaucouleurs, probably around February 1429, and tells the captain of Vaucouleurs, Robert de Baudricourt, to give her an escort of men to take her about 350 miles to Chinon. And she's laughed out of the castle at first. But she keeps going back and back and back, again and again. And eventually, and there are many details to the story that I don't have the time to go into here, but she eventually persuades Sir Robert de Baudricourt to give her an escort of 6 men, and they ride across the width of France, most of the width of France, to get to the Dauphin in Chinon. Now, that is 325 miles, 12 days and 12 nights of horse riding. While they're going through the hostile English and Burgundian part, which is from here to Vienne, which is right here. From Vaucouleurs to Vienne, that's about half the way to Chinon. They're riding at night. They're riding at night, they're laying low during the day. They're hiding out in barns and deep in the forest during the daytime to avoid getting captured by the English. Because the English have got news of this. They know that this girl is coming. This is not a secret. And the English have got patrols out looking for her. Now, in March 1429, she finally gets to Chinon, and she wins an audience with Charles. And Charles, as I say, is in a state of extreme desperation. He's broke. He doesn't have any money, or hardly any money left. His army is broken, demoralized, from defeat after defeat. He's, as I said before, he's basically got his bags packed for Spain. But he's willing to try anything now. And if a 17-year-old girl, peasant girl no less, who doesn't know how to read or write, says that she's going to lead him to Reims up here, deep into English territory, and see him crowned King of France, well, might as well try it. We've tried everything else and lost. Now, why do I point to Reims? Reims is significant here in this case because all kings of France have to be crowned king in the great cathedral in Reims. Okay? If he can't be crowned in Chinon, he can't be crowned in Orleans, he can't be crowned in Paris, that doesn't count. The holy oil with which the king to be is anointed is in Reims. The crown is in Reims. All the paraphernalia of coronating French kings, crowning French kings, is held in security in Reims. Pronounce it correctly, and that is Reims in the French way. And the English are obviously all over the place. You can see how many miles of English territory there are between Chinon and Reims. Now, Charles decides that, okay, she says she's sent here by God. She's supposed to be elected by the angels and so forth. So we're going to put her to the test immediately. And he sends down into the village of Chinon for Jeanne to be brought up to the castle. And she's brought in middle of the night. What was a huge fest going on, great banquet, a dance party going on, lords and ladies all dressed up in their finery in the great hall of the castle, and having just a good time as the court as the courtiers tend to do of royal houses in Europe in those days. Now, Charles says, all right, we're going to put her to the test. I'm going to dress more plainly than a lot of the courtiers are. I'm going to hide among the courtiers, and I'm going to put an impostor on the throne. Now, if Jen walks up and salutes the impostor on the throne in the great hall of the castle, well, then we'll know that she's a phony. You know, the test is, if she can pick me out of the crowd when I'm wearing relatively plain clothing compared to everybody else, if she picks me out of the crowd, then she will have passed her first test that she's sent here by God. Well, the story is she does just that. She walks into the great hall of the castle. This is played beautifully by Ingrid Bergman in the movie that she made about Joan of Arc in 1948. Very great scene in that movie. I recommend it to you. And she walks up the throne, takes one look at the guy sitting there and says, "No, you may be a good man, but you're not Charles." And she turns around, goes back and forth through the crowd, and picks him out. And kneels, curtsies before him and says, "God gave you peace, my dear king, my dear Dauphin." She doesn't call him king yet. He's not king yet. He's still just a Dauphin. He's not a king yet. He's just a king in waiting for a miracle to be delivered by his 17-year-old farm girl. And I need to re-emphasize here that at this point, she's cut her hair short, she's dressed as a man. Before she left Vaucouleurs and went out riding across English territory, she cut her hair short and put on men's clothing. Now, it needs to be understood that she did not disguise herself. She did not try to pass herself off as a man. She made it clear to everybody she met, the Dauphin included, all the Dauphin's generals and advisors and courtiers, that she was a girl dressed as a man. So unlike Mulan, there's no Mulan analogy here. Mulan, if you know that story, she successfully passed herself off as a guy for X number of years. Jen is not even doing that. She's dressing up as a man and cutting her hair short because that's the proper way to be a soldier. You can't ride a horse. You can't astride a horse if you're wearing a long skirted dress. And you can't put a war helmet on your head if you've got a woman's long hair. So she cuts her hair short, dresses as a man to facilitate her coming role as a soldier, which is exactly what she's going to be. And that's how she presents herself to Charles. So she passes her first test, the test of picking him out of the crowd. And in April of 1429, Charles gives Jeanne command of the French army. Now, her official title that he gives her is Chief of War. Now, I need to be careful when I say that he gives her command of the French army. In actuality, she is the theoretical co-equal of the various male top commanders of the army. Now, European armies at that time, medieval period European armies, French army in particular, do not have what we would call a chain of command. We've got a very rigid, very neat block and wire diagram of who's at the top, who's the commanding general, who the subordinate generals are, who the colonels and captains and majors, and all the way down to privates are. The military decisions of France are made by committee in more or less co-equal, committees composed of more or less co-equal numbers of civilian nobles from representing the king, war nobles, high-ranking knights, warriors, that sort of thing. And she is one among several of those high-ranking male leaders. She being the only girl, of course, because Dunois, d'Alençon, Bahir, names that you'll read about in my book or see in the movies if you choose to see the movies or read the book. So she is theoretically first among equals, but she eventually she eventually wins ascendancy over them just by the force of her personality. Now, I need to describe the strategic situation. Okay, so she's at Chinon, and by dint of her miracles and sincerity and charisma, she has won over Charles, won over the commanders of the army, that she's now going to be, if not in charge, at least co-equal with the guys who are collectively in charge. Now, over here at the end of my pointer, you see the city of Orléans, which is on the north bank of the Loire River. Now, I'm tracing the bank, of course, of the Loire River with my pointer. Nice pointer, huh? But anyway, you do what you can with what you've got. But anyway, this is the city of Orleans, at which New Orleans, Louisiana is named, of course. And if you can see, it's got a little bit of yellow border around it. That's because it is the last bit of royal, if you will, Free France on the north bank of the Loire River. Now, the English have been besieging it since the previous October. We're now talking April into late April, mid-April, late April of 1429. The English have been besieging Orleans since October of 1428. Now, Jeanne arrives with the army, with the rescue army. The city is on the point of fall. The people are slowly starving to death. The English have pretty well got the city ringed off with their own forces. But Jeanne appears, and in a series of battles fought around Orleans, she defeats the English. There's a battle at, I can rattle them off. There's Saint-Luc, Saint-Jean-le-Blanc, Augustin, Tourelles. These are all locations in the immediate vicinity, like in the suburb districts of Orleans, where in these different battles, she defeats the English and breaks up their army and forces them to give up their encirclement of the city of Orleans. And she really comes into her own as a military leader in all this. She's wounded twice. She has tremendous physical courage, moral courage, as well as physical courage. She's always out front leading the way with her flag, and as we'll see pictures of later on. But she's out there with her flag, leading the soldiers. She gets wounded twice. The first time when she steps on an iron spike ball that's on the ground, gets a nice puncture wound in the sole of her foot. And once that gets healed up, she is leading an attack on this big English castle called the Tourelles. It's a French-built castle, but the English hold it. French-built, but the English own the place. So it's manned by English soldiers, not saying that the French originally built it. She's going up the scaling ladder to attack that castle. And again, if you see the movies, you'll see this played out in very dramatic style in the various movies about Jeanne. She takes an arrow through the shoulder and knocks her off the scaling ladder. And the English think they've killed her. They really think she's dead. And she's taken off, badly wounded, apparently badly wounded, if not killed. But within the hour, they pull out the arrow, stop the bleeding, put a bandage on her, put salve on her wound and a bandage, and within a very few hours, if not less than an hour, the account's there, okay? But within a short period of time, considering the severity of the wound, she's back out front, waving her flag and saying, follow me, guys. When my banner touches the walls, it's all yours. Go in and take it, which they do. Now, when the English see her coming back after they're certain that she's dead. They're absolutely convinced that they've killed her. So when they see her come back, shouting at them, telling them to surrender in the name of God, they are convinced that they're being attacked, not by an angel, but by a demon from hell. Okay? The French are convinced that she's an angel. The English are convinced that she's a demon. And you see how this is playing out in the incredible medieval mindset of the day. So, long story short, she drives the English from around Orleans. And now, June the 12th through June the 18th, 1429, Jeanne defeats the English in battles at Jargeau, Mons, Beaugency, and Patay. Now, all these are towns up and down the Loire River. Jargeau is here, Mons is here. Jargeau is right here, upstream from Orleans. Mons is a little bit downstream. Beaugency is still farther downstream, and Patay is right about there on the road to Paris. And at these four locations, she inflicts more crushing defeats on the English army. Again, her being in the lead, showing the way to her soldiers, waving the flag, playing the strategies, playing the tactics. And she's wounded again when she's going up the scaling ladder at Jargeau. Her helmet is hit on the head by a thrown stone, knocks her off the ladder, but she's up again in a flash, saying, come on, boys, let's go. And eventually drives the English away from this pie shape of France that they had held previously before she showed up. Now it's time to get Charles to rise, which he does. So She's now got an army of 12,000 men, which Charles's finances are very poor, very bad shape. She's getting thousands of guys showing up who are willing to fight for free because it's her, because it's Jeanne. Okay, it doesn't matter that Charles doesn't have any money to pay the soldiers; they're willing to fight to join up and fight at their own expense. Again, before she showed up, they were broken, they were demoralized, they had given up. But now she comes along, and all of a sudden, there's hope. There's a belief in victory again that she's inspired. So she gets thousands of men pouring into her flag, and with those thousands of men, and Charles in tow, she leads them deep, deep, deep into English-held territory to the city of Reims, and at that beautiful cathedral in Reims, which I will show you pictures of, Charles is crowned king. And that coronation took place on July the 17th, 1429. And on December 1429, Charles ennobles Jeanne and her family descendants. They're peasants, but now all of a sudden, she is dubbed knight by the king. No, a 17-year-old peasant girl who can't read or write being dubbed a knight by the king of France. It never had happened before. It's never happened since. She's a one-of-a-kind in all history. So, Charles ennobles her. She and her family now have a coat of arms. They're now known as the family Dulis of the Lily, D-U space L-Y-S, Dulis, which means the Lily. She's now Jeanne the Lily. Her family is now Pierre and what's the brother's name? Her various brothers, they're all named Jacques and Pierre. Their last name is now Dulis, and there are descendants of them still alive in France today. Obviously, Jeanne had no descendants. She obviously died without any children. But today, her great, several times great grandnieces and grandnephews are alive and well in France with the Delis family name. Now, the war goes on. And it starts to go badly for a while, despite the fact that Jeanne's in the lead. Now, here, Compiègne, it really goes badly. She's taken prisoner by the enemy. She's bodily yanked off her horse. And she's gang tackled on the ground, and that's on May the 23rd, 1430. Now, she's taken by the Burgundians, the masked and treasonous French who see in green. They take her prisoner at Compiègne, and they sell her to the English for a huge, staggeringly huge sum of money. Now, obviously, by rights, she's a prisoner of war. And as a prisoner of war, she is within her rights to be ransomed by her own side. And her own side is within their rights to ransom her. But Charles makes no effort to ransom her. That's the subject of many more books about why he is such a wretched ingrate. Thinking, well, this peasant girl put the crown on my head. Maybe she can take it off just as easily. Because this is the point to remember here. It could not have escaped Charles' notice that whenever he and she were out in public together, the people were always cheering much, much louder for her than they were for him. I mean, long live the king, long live the king, long live the king, Jeanne, Jeanne, Jeanne. And the crowd, the crowds would do obeisance to the king, and then they would go nuts over her. And that could not have escaped his attention. So anyway, he makes no effort to rescue her, no effort to ransom her. The Burgundians sell her to the English for a huge sum of money. And the English, of course, want her dead. They want her absolutely dead. But they're not going to just, they can't just execute her. They've got to discredit her. They've got to accuse her of being a witch, accuse her of being a religious heretic. Because in doing so, if they put her to death for the heresy and witchcraft, that discredits Charles. Because what good is Charles' crown on his head? It was put on his head by a witch and a heretic. So they got to have her accused of heresy and convicted of heresy and witchcraft by a church trial. Now, of course, the English pay for this trial, and the trial is a political farce. It's conducted by the Bishop of France, many high-ranking French church leaders, but they're all Burgundians. Okay, they're all French who have sold out to the English and are entirely dependent on the English for their preferred positions, for their for the cushy lifestyles of living with their rich dioceses and so forth. So of course they're going to try. Of course they're going to find her guilty. Now she defends herself brilliantly. Again, as I described in my book, you can read in any biography of her. The trial lasts for about 5 months, and she does a great job defending herself all alone. 19-year-old peasant girl who doesn't know how to read or write, and she's defending herself against a jury of about 60 learned churchmen. And she humiliates them. She makes them look like a bunch of monkeys. And we know this because they kept very, very meticulous notes and transcripts of the trial. And you can go back to France, and if you can read 15th century French or Latin, you can go back and you can read how she made total fools out of the judges and juries who were planning to try her. Now, they had to drop the trial for witchcraft, the charge of witchcraft. That was because, according to the beliefs of the day, a woman became a witch by having sex with the devil, and she was investigated. She underwent an intrusive physical examination by the ladies of the English Royal Court, and they found out, well, too bad, guys, she's a virgin. Her virginity is intact. So they had to drop the witchcraft charge for that reason. But they still got her on heresy. And the reason they got her on heresy was because she was wearing men's clothes, which is contrary to the laws of Deuteronomy. It says in Deuteronomy, a woman shall not put on, a man shall not wear that which pertaineth to a woman shall not wear that which pertaineth to man, because that is an abomination in the eyes of God. Or words to that effect in Deuteronomy, in the Old Testament. And also because she puts her revelations from God above the authority of the church leadership. Now, the church is saying, well, you claim to be, I must make a qualification, not the church, but that part of the church which is on the English payroll. Okay, those French bishops, cardinals, monsignors, priests, what have you, that are on the jury, every one of whom is getting a tidy stipend from the English to find her guilty. So they find her guilty of wearing the men's clothes, as I said, and putting her revelations from God above what the church is telling her is what is real. And of course, being that they're French clerics on English payroll, they're going to tell her that her voices and visions are not from God, but from the devil. And that even though she's not had sex with the devil to become a witch, she is as a heretic still susceptible to being a tool of the devil by misinterpreting what she thinks are God's revelations as the devil's revelations. And she goes to the fire rather than recant her visions and voices. And she has a minor breakdown. They take her to the place of execution. They put a piece of paper in front of her, which is the abjuration, and they say, okay, Jeanne, sign this, make your mark on this, and this is, and she asks what it is, and it's explained to her that this piece of paper says that you disavow your visions and voices as not being for real. And her nerve fails her, and she signs it. She puts an X on it, an X in a circle to make her mark. And she's promised that if they do this, they will take her out of, first of all, I need to back up. She's been held for all these months in an English military prison with horrible, sadistic English soldiers as her guards, who beat her up, who starve her, who abuse her, who just, what they do to her is unspeakable, okay? What they do to her is just absolutely horrible. And she's driven to the brink of insanity by the way that she's abused all night in her cell by her sadistic English guards, after spending all day being hammered by the 60 judges of her trial in a cross-examination of her. But she's promised that if she abjures, takes back what she said are her voices, they will allow her to go into a church prison to be guarded by nuns for the rest of her life. And as soon as they got her marked on a piece of paper, the head bishop says, take her back where she came from and then throw her right back in the English army prison with the same sadistic 5 English soldier guards. And she's going to spend the rest of her life under that condition. And that's when she says, well, no, guess what? I withdraw my abjuration. My voices are for real. My visions are for real. I'd rather go to the fire than spend the rest of my life being abused by these 5 horrible English soldiers. And on May 30th, 1431, she's walked up to the stake, tied to it, and roasted alive. And which is, some movies do a better job, more graphic job than others of picking that. The war goes on. Okay, there's still a large English enclave. You know, the English own a lot less of France than they did before. You know, they've lost Rennes. They're still barely holding on to Paris, but not very tightly. They've still got a little arc of France right around here and down in the southwest. The 100 Years' War continues until 1453, when the French finally drive the English from France and win the 100 Years' War. And the last battle of the 100 Years' War is fought down here in the southwest of France, a place called Castillon. And it is there that Jeanne's old opposing English commander, whose name is Talbot, and he's 80 years old by this time. He's 80 years old and commanding the English army at Castillon, and he is killed in action. And he had once been taken prisoner by Jeanne at Patay. Backstory again, the Battle of Patay back in 1429. He was taken prisoner by Jeanne and her forces up right about here. He was subsequently released after the English paid a huge ransom for him. And he goes back, rejoins the English army down here many years later, and at the age of 80 is killed in action at the Battle of Castillon. But that's it. Everything that you see as green or yellow, everything that you see as green or red on the part of France here goes back to being yellow, because France is restored as one country. Now, in 1456, the Catholic Church conducts a posthumous retrial of Jeanne, which overturns her conviction for heresy. And this is how we know, specifically why we know so much about her, is that the church called 115 witnesses who had known her during the course of her life. And what these witnesses testified to, these 150 witnesses testified to, is written down in the archives. You can go read it, and it's been translated. Much of it has been translated into English, which was the primary main source for my book here. But there are hundreds and hundreds of pages in the archives in France of people who knew Jeanne, whether childhood friends from Domremy, whether it be members of the royal court, whether it be her brother's soldiers and commanders of the army. They went on and they testified about what she was, and the testimonies were all written down, and these testimonies were all taken under oath. And we now know more about Jeanne than we do about any prior figure in history. Okay? Because people who were alive, people who knew her when she was alive, are now talking about her onto hundreds of pages of recorded testimony. We know more about Jeanne than we know about Alexander the Great, than we do about Julius Caesar, than we do about any person in history that lived before her. And finally, on May the 16th, 1920, the Catholic Church names Jeanne as saint. Now, flipping the page here. What did she do? In one long run-on sentence, what did she do as an illiterate 17-year-old peasant girl? She took command of the often defeated and totally demoralized French army and led it to an astounding series of repeated and decisive victories over the English invaders. And the question is, how did she do it? There are a whole bunch of ways, a whole bunch of reasons, and both statements are about how she did it. And again, we're now getting into the meat of my book, which is the how she did it. First establishing what she did, and then establishing how she did it. The first how she did it is an unschooled but intuitive genius for military strategy and leadership. Now, I can make an analogy to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Okay, Mozart was writing some of the most beautiful work the world has, most beautiful music the world has known when he was still a small child. Where did Mozart get it? genius, okay? Where does Jeanne get her intuitive, unschooled, but intuitive grasp of military strategy? You have to chalk it up to genius. Now, this, me saying that Joan was a military genius is supported by testimony from her retrial, which I can now read to you. Excerpts from her retrial. And in the retrial, Simon Charles, who was the president of the Chamber of Accounts, in other words, the chancellor of the Treasury, who was treasurer for Charles, testified that Joan was very simple in all her actions, except in war, in which she was very expert. Now, there was a knight named Thibault d'Armagnac, and he said, apart from the doings of war, she was simple and innocent. But in the moving and disposition of troops, in the doings of war, and the organization of combat, and encouraging the troops, she behaved like she was the most skillful captain in the world, trained in all times for war. And then one of her co-commanders, Jean, Duke of Alençon, he testified, apart from making war, Joan's behavior was simple and young. But for war, she was very skilled, both in carrying a lance, in assembling the army, in organizing for combat, and in placing the artillery. Everyone was full of admiration that she behaved with skillfulness and prudence in military actions, like she was a captain who had been making war for 20 or 30 years, and especially in the placing of artillery, in which she excelled. Artillery being big guns, cannons. Next bullet point, a charismatic people that made people love her and want to follow her. Obviously, if you've caught on by now, she must have been charismatic to be a 17-year-old girl who puts on a suit of armor, rides up on a horse and says, okay, guys, I'm now your commanding general, follow me. And they do. There's a lot of initial headbutting between her and her male co-commanders. Again, which you see in various degrees in various books and in various movies. But after that initial headbutting period, in particular after she gets wounded at the Tyrrells and comes back with her wound healed up, partially healed up, bound up, and goes on to continue leading the army despite her wounds, the soldiers fall in love with her, the people fall in love with her. Wherever she goes, on the course of her brief career, adoring masses of people just mob her everywhere she goes. And the Journal of the Siege of Orleans, which was written down by people who knew Jeanne within a few years after her death, the Journal of the Siege of Orleans records, on page 52, the journal, written within a generation of Joan's death, reports that the people were making such rejoicing as if they had seen God descend in their midst. And there was marvelous press of people to touch her or the horse upon which she was. And we'll see, I'll show you a picture of that when we get to it. And Guy de Laval, there's also another French knight, Guy de Laval, Guy de Laval was one of the guys who volunteered at his own expense to join the army when he found out that Joan was one of the first victims. And Guy de Laval gushed in his adoring descriptions of Jeanne. He wrote, I went to her lodging to see her, and she sent for wine and told me that she would soon have me drinking in Paris. And this seems a thing all divine by her deeds and also from seeing and hearing her. So, she's a religious mystic, but she's not this spooky little waif who spends her days walking in the trees and walls because she's always got her eyes up looking at heaven. No, she's got both feet firmly on the ground. She looks people straight in the eye, but she exudes this personal aura, if you will, that people testify about repeatedly. And that's what motivated them to follow her. Tremendous courage on the battlefield in spite of all danger and the fact that she was wounded several times. She's always out front, leading on her horse, waving her flag, saying, follow me to the soldiers. She was wounded by the steel spike through her sole of the foot. She was hit by the arrow at Orleans. She was knocked off the scaling ladder by the thrown stone at her helmet. At Paris, she got another arrow through her thigh. So she's got 4 Purple Hearts. She was a 4-time Purple Heart winner by the American standard. But nothing phases her. Tough girl, better than the boys, physical fitness, athleticism, weapon skill, and horsemanship. Now, proof of that is the Duke of D'Alençon, who we quoted before. We saw her one day practicing jousting at a target. Okay, so there she is, up on a horse with a big lance under her arm, clopping, target, not jousting other knights, but jousting at a target. And she does it so well that he gives her a war horse. Now, war horses are expensive. You don't just give away a war horse, but he gives away one of his best war horses to her as a gift as he sees her skill on jousting. Now, where did she get the skill from jousting? Don't know. Okay. But there she was. And there she was doing it. And Marguerite Lettres testified in the retrial. Marguerite Lettres testified that Joan rode a horse carrying a lance as well as the best man at arms, and they admired her strongly for that reason. And it's a matter of record that she would stay in armor for 6 days and nights running, for example, during the height of her battles. She would sleep in her armor, get up, refresh, get on her horse, and be ready to go for another day. Just tough girl, you know. You see tough girls in modern movies these days, but she was the real deal. Conspicuous moral purity. That's one reason she is a saint, I'm trying to say. She forbade swearing by the soldiers. Now, making soldiers not swear. Good luck. I mean, if you think that's good luck, well, let's see the next thing she does. She drives the prostitutes out of the army brandishing a sword at them. Now, if you know anything about armies, you know that prostitutes stick to armies like flies stick to manure. Okay? And there she is. First she tells all the soldiers to stop cussing, stop taking the Lord's name in vain. And then there she is on her horse with her sword, driving the prostitutes out of camp, waving her sword at them. And the soldiers are saying, okay, or all right in French. But the point is that they've been so demoralized. I mean, they've been getting their butts kicked for 80 years. Their morale was in the tank, all right, in the toilet. And she just made clear to the soldiers that if they wanted God's help to win this war, they had to earn God's help by being God's army, God's soldiers. And yes, good looks. She was attractive. The guy said so. The guys in the retrial said that she was attractive. And they made very clear that while she was beautiful, they saw her naked. Okay, how could they not? They healed her when she got an arrow through the shoulder, when she got an arrow through the thigh. She did not have female medics. The medics were males. Okay, they had to take her armor off. They had to disrobe her to treat her wounds. She's sleeping on the ground in the middle of 12,000 guys. Of course, you're going to see her in various states of undress, just because that's the way it is when you're living in the field with the army. And they all said that she was beautiful, but they never dared to make any advances on her because her saintly qualities, her good morals, and conspicuous moral purity was so powerful that they just could not bring themselves to even think about making an advance on her. Now, when she was taken prisoner by the enemy and had no such moral impact on them, in all probability she was gang raped in prison, probably so. And she know by her own testimony that she was fondled at least twice. Intrusively fondled at least twice, possibly, if not probably, gang raped shortly before her decision to go to the stake. She knowingly exploited lucky circumstances. One of the first lucky circumstances she exploited was the prophecies. There were pre-existing prophecies in France, well known to the common people, well known to the aristocracy, that one day France in its darkest hour will be saved by a virgin from Lorraine. Well, this is where Lorraine is. She's a virgin. France is in its darkest hour that's ever known. You can see that from the map. The darkest hour until 1940 anyway, when the Nazis took over. But Everybody knew that she was coming. Everybody expected that she was coming. And she made full use of that. She would say, hey, haven't you heard the prophecy? Well, I am she, pointing at herself. And English blunders. The English army made a bunch of really severe strategic blunders, which I will not get into right now because I can't display it on the map, but it's in the book. I talk about that. Things that the English do wrong that she is able to exploit, and exploit when she does with the military genius that she is. And all of the above combined, the physical toughness, the moral purity, the good looks, the genius, the courage, all those combined with each other in a synergistic effect, by which I mean synergy. 1 + 1 = 3. 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. The whole is much better than the sum of the parts. Her good looks make her ingenious seem even more ingenious. Her moral purity makes her physical toughness seem even tougher. Her toughness makes her moral purity seem even more conspicuous. All of her noble traits, all her worthy traits combined with each other in a much whole is much greater than some of the parts effect. And the end result was that when she rose up on a horse and shouted, and again, this is beautifully portrayed in the movie by Joan of Arc with Jokovic and John, the messenger it's called. It's a horrible movie, except for the one part I'm talking about. She rises up on a horse and she shouts, all who love will follow me. And they did, and they won. And this concludes the lecture, subject to your questions, and the next thing will be the slideshow. For those of you who are able to stay, and do you want to take a break before getting to the slideshow, or do you just want to swing over?
I'm good.
Good? Okay. So let's go to the slideshow. Okay. This is our best guess as to what she looked like. Black hair, brown eyes, sunburned. And this is the amount of, there's only one picture of her that was made when she was alive, and it was made by someone who had never seen her, never saw her once. Gives her long hair and a dress while holding a sword, which is obviously ridiculous. So, but based on what we know about her, based on testimony in the retrial, this is what we think she looked at. This is the best guess we have. Now here is Lily Sobieski in character Jeanne. I think of all the actresses who portrayed her, I think Lily Sobieski does by far the best job. This is from the CBS TV miniseries that took place and was broadcast in 1999. And I want you to pay attention to the horse. Note the armor. You can see the armor she's wearing, an old statue here. Leave her horse. And there's her banner. And this is what it all comes down to. Yes, she's a saint. Yes, she's a religious mystic. Yes, she's got all sort of qualities, admirable qualities. But the thing that makes her stand out, the reason we know about her at all, is because, for crying out loud, she was a great general on her horse, leading a great army into battle and leading it into victory. Okay, now let's go on the travel log and follow her path back and forth across France. Most of these pictures I took myself when I spent some weeks driving back and forth across France. That's my rental car, by the way. I spent several weeks driving back and forth across France, following her route. Now, this is the town where she was born, the town of Domremy. Now, it was called Domremy for hundreds of years before she was born, but after her career, after she became famous, it became known as Domremy La Pucelle. La Pucelle is French for the maiden. So now it's not just, and she called herself Jeanne La Pucelle. That's the title she gave to herself, not Jeanne d'Arc, but Jeanne La Pucelle. And so the town of Domremy, since her time, has no longer been just Domremy, but Domremy La Pucelle. There's her house where she was born and raised. Like I said, that's the only house in the village that was built out of stone, not wooden thatch. That's the reason why it was the only house that survived, when the enemy soldiers raided the place and burned down the whole town. Okay. And today, more recently, since her career, they hollowed out a little niche in the front wall of the front door and put a statue of her in it. And down here, carved into the stonework now, you'll see the coat of arms of the Duris family. So, next slide. There's the interior of the house. Another fireplace. There's a little statue of her right there. Not the same one I've got, but similar to it. That's the front room, living room, dining room of the house. Okay, this is her father's garden. You saw the house 2 slides ago, a couple slides ago. Here's the edge of the house. Here's her father's herb garden. And this is where she had her first visions and voices appear to her when she was 13 years old, standing right there next to the church. Next slide. Yeah, I'm telling myself next slide. That's what I got one of these for. Got a lot of technology. Anyway, other places I have to say next slide, next slide, next slide. Anyway. Old habits are hard to break. But anyway, this is the front yard of her house. That's another monument to her there. This is the church. That's right next to the house. The church is about maybe not even 30 yards from the house. The house and her house and church are next door neighbors. That is the church in which she was baptized. That is the church in which she went to attend Mass every Sunday growing up. Now, most Saturdays when she could get away from the household chores, get away from minding the cattle and so forth, she's a farmer's daughter. She worked hard. Farmers' daughters do not have an easy life, they have a hard life. And when she was not pushing cattle or harvesting or helping her daddy plow and plant and harvest, on days when she could get away, she followed this footpath, this little dirt road, up to the forest to a little tiny chapel. That was one of the favorite retreats that she would go to as a child to get closer to God. The chapel of Notre Dame de Vermont, I should say. And there it is. This is the chapel right here that she would retreat to on her days of freedom, such days that she could get away. Now, and here's the statue of Jeanne, another one. See, waving her flag. And there's a close-up of the same statue. Okay, now here are the fields around Domremy, and his meat pastures right here where she watched her daddy's cattle and watched the villagers' cattle. The villagers collectively watched each other's cattle, I mean to say, and every family would take its turn, or every family's children would take their turn herding and shepherding the cattle for their day when it was their day to do it. And this is the field where Jeanne and her friends, her childhood friends, would herd the cattle. And I want to direct your attention to, if you can see it, this very large, very tall cathedral spire way in the background on the horizon. I'm going to get this down. Okay, there's the spire. And this is the Basilica Jeanne d'Arc. Okay, this was built between the world wars, and it's a tremendous building, as you can see. The inside is tremendous. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the inside. Lots of places they don't like you taking pictures of the inside, but the artwork inside is just staggering. And it's all around the walls on murals depicting scenes from Jeanne's life from beginning to end. So there's one side of it. There's the other side of it. It's a huge building. It's just tremendous. Now in front of it is a statue. And the statues are of her saints. There's St. Michael the Archangel, there's St. Catherine, there's St. Margaret, and this is little Jeanne, 13-year-old Jeanne, getting euphoric, ecstatic about seeing her vision of the saints. Statue of Jeanne, outdoor statue of Jeanne at the Basilica. And this is the countryside around Domremy. France, as countries go, France is a real garbage spot. It's really beautiful. And if you can get the heck away from Paris, get away from Paris, the hell with Paris. Go to the countries. We got good country people in France, just need to know where to find them. Okay. And when I was traveling around Domremy and the far rural Appalachia, if you will, part of France, the people were just wonderfully friendly. I speak some French, and as soon as I started speaking French to them, and they found out that I was an American interested in Joan of Arc, they were just as friendly and as helpful and as warm as you could possibly imagine. Okay, this is the road to Vaucouleurs. Remember that she had to travel from Domremy to Vaucouleurs to get have a session with Sir Robert de Baudricourt to persuade him to give her some knights to escort her across France to Chinon. It's 12 miles from Domremy to Vaucouleurs. This is the road. When she was 17 years old, she just, packed up her belongings in a kit bag and she just walked on that road 12 miles from Domremy to Vaucouleurs. And this is Vaucouleurs. This is the town hall of Vaucouleurs, Hotel de Ville, and this is the equestrian statue of Jeanne. Oops. Okay, there she is. Tying the religious symbolism into the military symbolism. She's holding up the sword as if it's a cross, while she's astride a horse wearing armor. Now, this is the gate in the town of Vaucouleurs, out of which she rode to go to see Charles at Chinon. Now, you can see that this town, these towers went all the way around the town at one time. They completely encircled it. Today, this little segment of wall is left, this little segment of wall is left, and this gate is left. The rest of it has been turned into, modern housing tract development, as you can see in the background. But it was this gate out of which she rode with her 6 escorts to go see Charles of Dauphin at Chinon. And there's the gate. And here's the plaque next to the gate. You can see it's 1929, 1429, 1929. This series of plaques is put up all over France on the 500th anniversary of Jeanne's career in 1929. It says Jeanne d'Arc. I'll read for you. The French says, departed Vaucouleurs through this gate of France for the first stage of her journey on Wednesday, the 23rd of February, 1429, 500th centenary. And there's a close-up of the bronze portrait of her, which is a top and center of all the these signs, which, as I said, are all over the northern half of France. Every place she went, there are these signs. We'll see them again. Okay. Passage de Jean de Metz. Yeah, George Washington slept here indeed.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, you quote exactly quote, Joan of Arc slept here. Jean Le Pucelle slept here. Okay, here's a street sign in Vaucouleurs. Passage Jean de Metz. Jean de Metz was the first French knight who believed in her. And it's like, the prophet appearing. Jean de Metz was one of the knights who served under Sir Robert de Baudricourt in Vaucouleurs. He was the first convert that she made. And it was him going to Sir Robert de Baudricourt saying, sir, you really ought to listen to this girl. She is something else. I think she's the girl. So eventually, Jean de Metz and other people, she built a public following, but Jean de Metz was her first follower. He's got a street named after him in Vaucouleurs today. Now, of course, we can't get away from commercialization even today, even after almost 600 years. So, of course, across the street, you've got Jeanne Optic, Jeanne Eyeglasses Store. So, and it continues. We've got Bakery Tomasi. There's the phone number if you want to dial them up. But Boulangerie Tomasi. And their specialty is Jeanette's de Vaucouleurs. That is their specialist pastry from that bakery. Okay, this is Chinon. This huge Well, here's this town of Chinon. And here's a huge castle, this enormous castle that is where the Dauphin Charles was. And this is where she went to meet the Dauphin and persuade him to give her command of the army. There's the front gate. She's going up this approach road through this gate. It's a tremendously huge building, as you can see by the guy standing right there. And another shadowy finger inside the gate. Shadowy finger inside the gate. But it's a big, big tower. She went through that gateway to go meet Charles in the Great Hall where that tremendous theatrical scene I told you about took place. Oops. There it is. Okay. Now it's all in ruins now. But visualize that this enormous room lit by dozens of flaming torches, and you've got all the lords and ladies in their finery, and the jesters entertaining the crowd, and the acrobats and whatnot. And again, I recommend you the Ingrid Bergman movie to get a sense of that. This is where she meets the Dauphin Charles, and he plays that trick on her tester, as I talked about before. There's the fireplace. After she discovered him in the crowd, the two of them drew apart, and they stood in front of this fireplace and had a very private conversation, a very short, well not short, but private, whispered conversation on everybody's earshot, which eventually persuaded Charles that yes, she is the good, she is the real deal. And here's another one of these series of gems here, plaques next to the fireplace. This is the top of the still Castle Chinon, and this is the Tower of Coudray. This is where Charles made her honored guest. As soon as she persuaded him that night that she was the answer to France's problems, the answer to Charles' problems, he had her moved out of the tavern, the inn where she's staying down in the town, and moved her up into very elegant, for the day, elegant surroundings in the Tour of Coudray. So she's really coming up in the world after having just spent a day in the company of the Dauphin. She moved into there. Now, I told you that she was very good. Alan Soren told us that she was very good at placing artillery, managing artillery on the battlefield. Here in Chinon Castle in the courtyard, you can see examples of these huge cannons that she became so expert in using. There's the mouth end right there. There's the rear end. There's the rear end now, not pointing another way. And another one, the smaller one, that's up on wheels. You can see how huge and unwieldy these things were. It took teams of multiple draft animals to put them in place. There's another muslin of the cannon. And that's a statue of her on the horse in Chinon. And trampling over, following her soldiers right there. Again, the inevitable flag and sword waving aloft as she goes forward. And of course, you've got to have Jeanne d'Arc Square when anytime it's been visited by Jeanne. Okay, this is Orleans, where she won her first great victories against the English. This is the Loire River. You've heard me talk a lot about the Loire River. This is the south bank, and you'll see a strategic situation of Orleans being on the north bank, the north side of the river. The last piece of Free France that's on the north side of the river. And if the English knew that if they could take Orleans, the last patch of Free France, and then take possession of the bridge, you see the footings of the old bridge here. Where's the new bridge over there? So here are the footings of the old bridge that was there when Jeanne was there. If the English could take Orleans, capture this bridge, they would cross over to the south bank of the Loire, and the rest of France would be open to them. So this is the last chance of anybody on the French side to stop the English at Orleans at the site of that bridge and this river. Okay, now here is a painting of Jeanne's entry into Orleans, and again, the elements of the standard scene are becoming pretty monotonous by now. The horse, the banner, the suit of armor that you see right there, and just mobs of people just doing a huge public swoon over her. Now, I spent several hours This painting was done in 1870s by an artist named J.J. Scherer. And I've seen this in a museum in Orleans, and you could not fit it in this room. The figures are nearly life size. The painting is about 2 stories high. It's a gigantic painting. You know, you could put it in this room if you knocked out the ceiling and stuck it up into the second floor. You could fit it in. Okay. Now I spent several hours walking up and down the streets of Orleans, walking up and down the streets of the old town of Orleans, looking for the best match I could find, and that's what I came up with. So the half-timbered buildings, the modded storefronts beneath the old half-timbered buildings. Try to superimpose that onto that, and then I do what it was like. Okay, now this is the house of Jacques Boucher. This is the town, this is the house in Orleans where she stayed while she was leading the English to victory over she was leading the French to victory over the English. She would go out, fight a battle, come back, go out, fight a battle, come back, go out, fight a battle, come back. And where she came back to after each day of fighting was this house where she was given a room to live in the house of the city treasurer, whose name is Jacques Boucher. Now this, quite sadly, I can't tell you that this is the real actual house. The actual house burned down in 1940 during World War II when the Germans did a dam down on the city of Orleans, and the original house burned down. Now after the war, the French people rebuilt it using the original plans, but I got to tell you, sadly, that this is a reproduction of the house, not the original. But the Joan of Arc Society headquarters is in there, and I went in there and had a very nice conversation with people who run the place. So it was a good time. Okay, this is where Jen received her most severe wound, where this monument with the cross on top is. She's going up the scaling ladder like this, like this, like this, and you'll see in the movies, which I encourage you to see, when she gets shot through the shoulder with the arrow, knocked off the scaling ladder, and is medically evacuated to the rear, and an hour or so later comes back into the fight. But this monument marks as closely as we can determine the spot where she was wounded. Okay, this is City Hall of Orleans, and here's a statue of Jen right there. Does anybody count how many statues we've seen?
I was thinking about that just for a moment.
Yeah. But anyway, here's the statue of Jen in front of City Hall, Orleans. And the French take care of what they have. And here's when I was there, one of the local curators was just doing his job with his gold-based paint, reinscribing the base of the statue. And it's kind enough to let me get a picture. Okay, this is another big statue of Jen on a horse. This is the main square of Orleans. This is the city center of Orleans, dominated by Joan of Arc, which is what the GIs call it.
Oh, okay.
That's when the American GIs landed in France, and they see all these statues.
Well, they saw enough of the statues.
They saw enough of the statues, she became Joan of Arc to the American GI, my own father and mother. So my dad was in France for the war. And that's it.
Semi-complimentary, it wasn't the right.
Given the way GI humor is, it was kind
Oh,
of.
yeah, it was pretty mellow.
And Rue Jean d'Arc Street, and of course, we've got a little Lego structure.
I was going to say that looks like Legos.
Yeah, it looks like it's something like Legos. Jen on the horse with 100, the building number 100, you can see it, 100 Rue Jean d'Arc is the address. And this is actually a very fun restaurant. I enjoyed eating at. Let me call it that. Croix Hotel, cross of the Maid. Okay. Résidence Personne Âgée Isabelle Romay. Okay. This is the old folks home in Orleans, and it's named after Isabelle Romay. Well, who's Isabelle Romay? I'm going to tell you. Jeanne's mother.
Oh,
Now, after Jeanne, after the retrial, okay, after the retrials take, Jeanne's mother lived long enough to see her daughter exonerated in the retrial. And after that, she went into retirement. She moved from Domremy to Orleans, and she lived out her days in comfort with a fat pension, living out her days on the dime of the people of the city of Orleans. And so, in honor of Jeanne d'Arc's mother, the old folks' home residence in Orleans is named after her mother. Okay, this is a statue of Charles Piguet, who lived from 1870 to 1914. He's famous, among other things, for writing out one of the two stage plays about Joan, the one poems. And you can see the date of death, 1914, you get one guess, that's World War I. So he was born in 1870, wrote the two stage plays about Joan, and he was killed in action in 1914, first of World War I. I got to throw in a bit about the Americans. Okay, I'm going to read this for you. It's in French, of course. But the 16th of August, 1944, the city of Orleans was liberated by the army of General Patton of the Army of the United States of America. So, you'll see these all over France too. Every place you go where American troops have been, some places are better maintained than others, but you know, if you look far enough, you'll see a monument commemorating the day that the Americans liberated them from the Germans. This is the one in Orleans. Okay, now, the first week of May is the anniversary of Jeanne coming to Orleans and winning all those battles to drive the English away. The first week of May, every year, the city of Orleans shuts down and they go absolutely nuts over their Jeanne. And it's a week of processions and ceremonies and banquets, and every year they get a teenage girl, and they put her in armor, and they put her up on a horse, and she is Jeanne d'Arc for a week. And yeah, you got to imagine that's got to be some experience for a 17-year-old French girl to go through being Joan of Arc for a week. And they don't just put anybody up on that horse. They just don't put any teenage girl up on the horse. And she's got to be something in her own right to get that privilege. That's her recognition. Okay, this is Jargeau. This is one of the first battles she fought after liberating Orleans. This is what is left. This is what is left of the city walls. The rest have been demolished. You see these modern buildings to the left and to the right of what was the old gate to the old city walls. There's yet another Joan of Arc was here plaque. And this is a statue in the middle of Jargeau. And there's a close-up of the statue in the middle of Jargeau. Okay, now here is the bridge at Maid. Now this obviously is not the bridge that was there in 1429. But Jeanne's victory at Battle of Maid entailed capturing this bridge across the Loire River from the English. So it was a battle for the possession of the bridge. The bridge is being very important. The Loire River being border between Free France and English-held France. She had to capture this bridge to make any further progress against the English, and she did. Fought a great battle here at Maid, and this bridge goes approximately where the old bridge would have gone in 1429. Okay, this is down the Beaugency. Again, the Loire River. Again, another battle where the English hold it down. Jeanne drives them from it. Look at this castle tower right here where my pointer is. That's that. Now this is a French-built castle. Obviously the English took it. The English took it from the French, made it their own, and it was an English castle until such time as Jeanne showed up. So here's our statue of Jeanne in Beaugency. And turn around. This is kind of a cool view because here the statue is positioned to suggest Jeanne leading her troops forward to attack the English in Cass. Beaugency. And Place du Noir in Beaugency. Dunois, D-U-N-O-I-S, Place du Noir. Dunois was one of the male co-commanders of her leading army. Like I said, there were a bunch of those. Dunois, D'Alençon, right here, about half a dozen guys who were going down in history as battle buddies, war buddies of Jeanne, assisting her, co-commanding the army with her, but very much in her pocket. And they liked it. Okay, this is an open farmer's field, but this is Patay. This is where the Great Patay was fought. There was no town really nearby. At the time, this was a dense forest with a clearing in the middle of it. But as far as anybody can tell, based on archaeologists digging up old horseshoes from that time, as far as they can tell, this is approximately where the Battle of Patay was fought on the 18th of June, 1429. Okay, Reims. This is where Charles was crowned king. This is the great cathedral of Reims. I did not take this picture because when I went to Reims, the facade was covered with scaffolding. So, down. Too bad. So I had to go surfing. I had to go web surfing to find a good picture of the cathedral of Reims. But you can see how enormous the building is by the people. I mean, the doors alone are about 30 feet tall. The gigantic doors alone, just the doors are 30 feet tall compared to the people. And that tower is just, so upward toward heaven. That's the whole point of Gothic architecture. This is the inside. Again, these are not my photos. These are professional photos I got offline. But you can see how beautiful it is with the stained glass windows filtering light through it, sunlight through it. This is looking toward the altar, and would have been right there that Charles got on his knees before the Bishop of France and had the crown put on his head. And Jeanne was standing right next to him, looking mighty splendid in her shining armor. As the crown comes to rest on his head. There's a statue of her. She might have been at Reims, at the coronation. Close up of the same statue. There's a statue of her, another statue of her on a horse from the Cathedral of Reims. This is Compiègne. This is where she was captured. I had not been to Compiègne. So I got this. I've not been to Compiègne, I've not been to Rome. But there's a statue in town of Compiègne where she was taken prisoner by the Burgundians, subsequently sold to the English. And that is a tower of the castle where she was imprisoned for several months. She was in the dungeon with a window like that, and what you could see. And that's the side of the stake. That's the bishop right there. That's where she died. So, two questions. That's all I've got. Questions.
Is she buried anywhere? Or?
No, it's ashes. They took her ashes and they dumped them in the sun. So the executioner, as in the house, the executioner said that her heart would not go. He said he poured a flour and pitch and served them by the water on it. Couldn't get it to that. So he took her heart, all her ashes, put them in the sack, went on the bridge over the Sun River when it was in the river, and chucked her ashes over the side of the bridge into the river. So her ashes were now scattered across the bottom of the English Channel someplace. If there have any more questions, comments, please. Well, thank you for coming. I do appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. Very fun. Oh my goodness. Joan of Arc and the history of the French and under war. Yeah, very good.
Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button. Hit that bell icon to get notified when there's new content coming from the Greece Historical Society.
You can visit us on the web at GreeceHistoricalSociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society. And you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road. This has been a Greece Historical Society Productions.